Every video game is the next big thing. At least that's how the momentum feels during the release window. The hype builds and builds. Everyone is talking about it. Then months, or maybe just weeks later, the game is dead. Something you wouldn't dare miss out on is now $30 down the drain as your friends, the social media hype men, and most players have already moved on to the next game. Then the cycle repeats. I've fallen victim to this model, and it doesn't feel good. This hype is killing video games.
I forgot you guys can't hit each other. Yo, Drake, if you hit the circles when you're farming, it does twice as much.
Oh yeah. I have a lot of supplies for you. Materials for you whenever you're ready.
Oh baby, I'm ready.
The hype machine for games these days is massive, influential, and fast-paced. It can catapult a game up to dizzying heights of cultural exposure and make whatever is hot at that moment inescapable. Occasionally, a game like this seizes the limelight and forces itself into long-term relevance. The prime example is obviously Fortnite, but there are plenty of others that have achieved this too. But much more often, these games fade back into the ether. Their brief moment in time is forgotten as quickly as it came as the players move on. Sometimes to the next big thing, sometimes back to a comfort game. The only constant is change. If you think about it, this cycle isn't surprising. Maybe it was even inevitable. The advent of streaming and content creators means that people are always looking for a fresh, new experience to leverage for viewership and engagement. Would Shroud have successfully maintained his large fan base if he had continued on playing Counter-Strike forever? If you are an early adopter of a game that churns its way to the top of the viewer charts on Twitch or YouTube, it could be huge for a creator's brand. There is incentive to wade out into the unknown and spend the cash on unproven games to try and latch on a ride to the top. If part of that is convincing viewers that a new game is worth investing in, that's the price of doing business. Let's not forget that companies will also pay popular personalities to showcase their games on stream. When a YouTuber injects an advertisement into one of their videos, no matter how clever or interesting the segue, it doesn't feel natural. Generally, these paid promotions feel like an advertisement. Raid Shadow Legends, anyone?
And get ready to raid.
This video is not sponsored in any way, but if you want to help out, like and subscribe. It is entirely different when your favorite Twitch personality is participating in a promotional stream. You can't tune out or skip through the advertising. The content is the advertisement. Add in some stream drops and the incentive to watch goes up. Plus, now you have free stuff to use in game. Time to go make a purchase or download, right? I'm not being critical of how YouTube and streaming is monetized. Content creators have to make money to keep making content, and advertisement is a surefire way to ensure cash flow, but it does make for an interesting dynamic in gaming. Recently, Nadeshot made some comments about games and the way players feel about them.
For some reason, everybody in the gaming community wants games to fail. People complain about not having enough games to play, but when new games come out, even before they have played it, they're like, that game sucks, I'm not going to play it.
He's off the mark here, even though I actually think he's on the right track. I don't get the impression that people want games to fail. They just do fail. And when people complain about not having enough games to play, what they are really complaining about is a clear decline in quality standards for new titles. There are so many choices when you're looking for a game to play. The trouble is trying to sift through all of the options to find something worth your time. For most people, it's going to feel terrible to spend hard-earned money and commit valuable time into a game, only for it to not work, be abandoned by a developer, or actually just be a thinly veiled cash grab. These are limited resources for almost everyone, and it's important to players how they spend them. We don't need to excuse large corporate entities when they blunder in the process of putting out games that resonate with players. It is not our responsibility to coddle giant companies when people don't enjoy their games. If they can't or won't meet the needs of players, hopefully someone else will. Enter the current era, where games are frequently flavor of the month, and at any given moment, there are probably titles you have never heard of or seen getting a lot of viewership for any number of reasons. Those reasons are largely unimportant, but they do need to exist in some form. Games that are fundamentally bad won't catch on, no matter how aggressively they are promoted, but this cycle can make games feel like a letdown. A game that is a letdown is not evidence that the game is bad or not worthwhile. Some of the titles that have had a short-lived time in the spotlight have actually been great, either to play, to watch, or both. Phasmophobia shows an all-time player peak of about 112,000 on Steam charts, but would you be surprised to hear that in the past 30 days it has averaged about 16,000 active players? That's roughly the same as Helldivers 2, a game that would seem to have more lasting appeal. I never played Phasmophobia, it just isn't a style of game that I enjoy, but it was absolutely a blast to watch others play in streams. The fact that it had such a brief run at the top is not a reflection on quality. There are other flavor of the month games that I did play. One of them was Sea of Thieves. It's a little awkward to put this game alongside the others because it first launched for Xbox and Windows, but not Steam in 2018. It didn't get a Steam release until 2 years later in 2020. Population data is a little strange for that reason, as the game was already old by the dates we can find concrete figures. It also had a less grassroots marketing campaign. It was developed by Rare, published by Microsoft Game Studios, and benefited from its status as a first-party game. It even got a PS5 release in April of this year, but it definitely had its time for viewership. Sea of Thieves is a great game. In the first play session I ever had, I was blown away by its simplistic nature and the amazing environment. I hopped on a galleon with some of my friends, marveled at the incredible looking ocean, and played sea shanties while we cruised around and learned how to maneuver the boat. We sailed up to islands, dropped anchor, and explored while hunting treasure. We launched out of cannons and spent time practicing reeling in chests with the harpoons. We cooked food, or we didn't, ate it, and got sick. The holes in the bottom of our boat needed to be repaired with timber after run-ins with other players or skeleton ships. The first time we were floating around and heard the orchestral music that heralds the open sea boss encounter with a megalodon is exactly the type of experience that highlights the joy and discovery of video games. A few short weeks later, the experience was over. Sea of Thieves was a fun, engaging, and a unique adventure. Ultimately, ironically, it was also a little shallow. The boys moved on, and the fun factor is severely diminished when playing alone. We put away our eye patches and peg legs, and were safe from gunpowder barrels. The excitement was gone. We also really enjoyed New World. Unfortunately, this game is an interesting case study in design flaw and mismanagement, but for a brief moment in time, it took over the MMORPG genre. I can't think of a game that had a more catastrophic fall from relevance than this, though. If you look at the population trend to see how quickly it dropped to almost zero, it looks a lot like the failed Halo experiments from 343 Industries. To this day, I don't think I've heard a better sound effect for mining in a video game than the noise of your pickaxe in New World. It's supremely satisfying, but just not quite enough to keep the game relevant. These are just a few examples of games that friends picked up and convinced others to play with them. There are others, of course. Fall Guys, Helldivers 2, Valheim, Risk of Rain 2. For a while, I joined in, but after the repetitive rhythm of giving something a try and then wondering where they all went after a month or so, I started being more cautious. Frankly, it sucks to pick up a game and not get much time out of it because everyone moved on quickly. How many people are playing Palworld now? Hint. It's not many. 23,000 is just barely more than 1% of the all-time peak population over 2.1 million. I've never played Palworld, but have had it recommended to me. That's not to say I never will, but if I ever pick it up, there won't be any contemporary content. For some players, that might be part of the consideration about whether or not to play. For those who already have played, was the $30 money well spent, or are you a little bummed about the final product? Today, Spectre Divide and Delta Force Hawk Ops are trending highly on Twitch. By the time you're watching this, who knows what will be up there. I'd bet a lot of money it won't be either of those games.
Yeah, this game is gonna easily, and I mean easily, take over. It's the first, like, arena shooter MOBA that actually is good. All the other ones kind of stink.
What was the most recent game you tried out because everyone else was doing it? Leave a comment down below. Don't get me wrong, it's still a personal choice to put down a game if this happens. Even more so if it's single player focused. But when your usual gang uninstalls something and moves on to a new game, you might feel the pressure to do the same. I much prefer to game with my buddies, and when they get bored, it makes many games less fun. Or maybe it's the case that the novelty of a new experience is the whole point. The initial exploration and learning phase is frequently the best part of a game. When that's over, you have lost nothing if you walk away. I've written off a ton of games immediately because they were clearly a copy of something I had already played. Basically every Call of Duty game fits here, for example. But if instead the experience is new and exciting, just that can be enough. To use Palworld as an example again, the game is still listed as early access. On Steam, this means that this game is not complete and may or may not change further. If you are not excited to play this game in its current state, then you should wait to see if the game progresses further in development. Palworld was successful and has received more updates, including one as recently as June 27th, but there are cases of developer abuse or failure. Battlefield 2042, ARK, DayZ, Multiversus all come to mind. Developers aren't necessarily incentivized to finish their games because of this. If you can rope players in during an early access period, you get their money up front. In an ideal world, this helps to fund further development so players receive a polished version of a game they're excited about. Free-to-play games can use the same window to sell microtransactions and cosmetics. Some of the worst offenders might even sell DLC at this stage, which is, in my opinion, a clear violation of trust and goodwill. This disclaimer about early access is a get-out-of-jail-free card, and when all of this comes at the cost of a complete and finished game, the players lose. And not just the players who are involved with the game, all players. A lucrative early access or beta period shows other companies that people are willing to spend money on games that don't necessarily deserve it yet. Then it happens again. On the one hand, there are more options, something we had less of back in my day. But is that an illusion? Are there more games that are worth it today than there used to be? It's hard to say, and I'm not nearly smart enough to make an objective call one way or the other. All I can say for sure is that the way we discovered worthwhile games was different in the past. I used to look forward to EGM and Game Informer coming in the mailbox. Someone took the time to write up reviews, previews, and news, then get it edited, printed, and sent out to subscribers. It felt official and was a prime way to get a look at exciting games in the pipeline. Speaking of subscribers, we also had, until recently, E3. It was the World Cup of gaming news, and there were so many fantastic games that the world got to see for the first time there. Nowadays, you can pay for the privilege to not just see but participate in an early access. You just do so at your own risk. Whether today's reality of social media craze and the hype of promoted content is better or worse is ultimately up to you. It's all subjective. I think it's just different in that it requires more caution and thoughtfulness from the player. If you want to draw a comparison between different media, you might first think about a movie or TV show. Is an $11 movie ticket for 1.5 hours worth it in the same way that a $20 early access game that you might play longer, even if it never gets finished? What about a $10 cosmetic in a game you only play for 4 hours? It's a little strange, but I think the best comparison here is actually a book. For one, books tend to be cheaper and take more time investment to read, which probably makes the cost to time spent ratio a lot closer. But maybe more important is how we read. There are definitely books that people will read multiple times or revisit later because they are favorites or hold special meaning. But more often, once a book is finished, it is never picked up again. If you buy a game and play through enough that you might call it done and then set it aside, is that so different? Navigating the modern day ecosystem of gaming is tricky for players. I'm not here to tell anyone how to spend their time or money. I'm also not trying to tell you how to enjoy your games, or how you shouldn't. The troubling reality nowadays is that every developer and publisher wants a piece of you and your wallet. They always did, but the trade-off seems much less fair today than it used to. More and more, it feels like games exist to sell a battle pass and cosmetics instead of an experience. Compounding the issue of predatory games is the relationship between the player and marketing. When content creators push a new game, it blurs the line between content and commercial. The parasocial relationship between a creator and their viewers is like an IV for advertising, and may make players more susceptible to falling for the hype of a new game, even if it ultimately doesn't deserve that attention. For games that are worth investing in, just make sure it's something you will be happy with once you put it aside for whatever your next adventure will be. That's better for you in the short term and all players in the long run.